Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Maximum Downforce, the official Downforce Radio Formula One podcast. I'm your host, Will Knight, and joining me, as always, Topher Smith and Harry Parkhouse as we take a look at last weekend's United States Grand Prix. It was quite the affair, quite a stunning show of American sport. Realistically, it was the sign that Formula One may have finally, after years of trying, broken into America. The Netflix effect, as it's been dubbed. Topher, before we get onto the race, the crowd itself was absolutely staggering. 400,000 people, 51 times what it was back in 2018. It just shows the growth of Formula One in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an incredible event, not just in terms of the racing that we had on track, but also the atmosphere that the American crowd was generating over the weekend. And that's exactly the sort of thing that Formula One needs. During the pandemic, we've had quite a few races where there have been a limited number of spectators in attendance. And I don't think the racing has suffered for that, but in terms of the atmosphere, you could definitely tell that something was a bit different. And with the United States Grand Prix, they really know how to put on a show in America. It's great to see. You could hear the cheers in the crowd with the duel between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Sergio Perez making a good performance as well. The crowd really helped make the event in America.
Harry, could you attribute this to the recent news? Oh, I say recent, it was quite a while ago actually, that the Miami Grand Prix will be making its debut on the calendar next year. 2 races in the States, a possible third sometime in the future with the likes of Las Vegas being brought in. Do you think that it's just Formula One finally breaking in, or is it a multitude of reasons?
I think you can attribute some of it down to the Miami race and future races in America, yeah. But I do believe that a lot of it this year was revolved around not only do we have the spectacle of fans back at the track after 2 years, haven't been in America since 2019 with the Formula One, and it's a huge spectacle whenever they put a show on, let alone when there's a championship battle in their back garden, effectively. You've got Verstappen versus Hamilton, blow for blow. It's not over yet, and it's far from over. It's going to go to the final race. And having that in America is something that Formula One hasn't seen in a long, long time. Of course, we've seen Hamilton for the past couple of years just run away from the title, especially when in America. So having the title fight is key, I guess, to the support and the crowd. But you look at upcoming races and in Miami next year, and as you said before, Vegas as well, it does have that attraction. There are a multitude of reasons, I would say, as to why America is becoming so famed with F1 at the moment. Yes, we know how ecstatic American fans can be. We know how patriotic they are, and we know how much they do love their motorsport. And to get this support from the American fans into F1 can only be a good thing in my eyes, because yes, they do go over the top in a lot of reasons, but is that necessarily a bad thing when they create such a spectacle for the fans at home? Obviously, if you can't travel all the way to America, then you have to watch it on your TV screens, but they make sure of it in America that when you are watching on your TV screens, it's somewhat of a spectacle at least. They have obviously the celebrities there, they have all the fans, and on that line of the fans as well, it didn't really seem, because in America, they don't have too much representation within Formula One other than Haas. So there wasn't necessarily a one-sided affair with the fans like a Verstappen show or Ferrari or many Hamilton in Silverstone. It was quite even. You were seeing fans from all over the shop, and it did provide a very unique spectacle, and one that I think will be savoured for the rest of the season.
Ultimately, it wasn't just the everyday person who was at the Grand Prix. Celebrities were out in force at this year's United States race in Texas. The Circuit of the Americas, playing host to some of the biggest names in television and film. Ben Stiller, Winnie Harlow, Logan Paul, Billy Joel, just to name a few. Although quite a few of them had really nice interviews with the likes of Martin Brundle, Sky Sports, Channel 4, all of them giving their opinions on the sport, especially Ben Stiller and Shaquille O'Neal. We'll get to Shaquille O'Neal later. It's one particular interview which is really taking people's interest, and ultimately the backlash of the Formula One community when rapper Megan Thee Stallion was on the grid with her security detail. Martin Brundle, bear in mind Martin Brundle is 62 years old. He is a 62-year-old man. He walked up trying to get an interview for Sky Sports. Ultimately, the security's first attempt to bat him away, basically, was dismissed by Megan. She gave him an answer. She said that she wasn't going to be doing any rapping today. A humorous joke to try and give Martin an answer. And then he tried to ask her what and who she would be supporting. So another member of her security detail came up to her and told Martin Brundle he couldn't ask her that. Ultimately, they can ask them that. There was no reason why Martin Brundle should not have been able to ask that question. Ultimately, I think, in all honesty, it's... I don't know if you'll agree with me, Topher, but it's pure ignorance at this point. When you're on the Formula One grid, you should expect to have TV there. And ultimately, if you don't want to be interviewed, you don't want to be interviewed. You're not going to be forced to. But security batting away Martin Brundle, it's not the image which Formula One needs right now as it tries to break into America.
I just want to start by saying that I already have a lot of respect for Martin Brundle. He's one of the people who I hold in the highest regard in the Formula One paddock. And this particular instance and his handling of the situation just makes me love the guy even more. I think he handled it very professionally and very brilliantly. When it came to the incident with Megan Thee Stallion, she seemed like she was up for it. And she didn't really give any sort of like real answers, let's say, but she wasn't the one who was batting Martin Brundle away and saying, no, I'm not talking to you. She did try and answer at least his first question rather humorously. And we're thinking maybe Martin could have got an interview out of her, but then, as you said, Will, it was her security detail who were the ones who stepped in and said, no, you can't talk to her. And Martin Brundle delivering that now famous line, oh, I can, because I just did. Again, his handling of the situation, I think, was absolutely brilliant. But it speaks more volumes about the people who managed to get onto the grid in the first place, I think. And I think it's absolutely brilliant that we can get celebrities who come onto the grid to be a part of the event. If I give you an example of Ben Stiller, as was mentioned earlier, you might have someone who's a bit of a newer Formula One fan, maybe watching it for the first time. Then they see someone they recognise, such as Ben Stiller, and think, oh, I've seen him at Night at the Museum, for example. I know that guy. And then that piques their interest a bit more. So having celebrities on the grid, I think, is a good thing for Formula One. There's absolutely no doubt about that, in my opinion. Rory McIlroy as well, the famous golfer. If you're a fan of golf and you see him on the Formula One grid, you then start thinking, oh, he likes Formula One. Maybe I can get a bit more into it as well. But I think what it really comes down to is how the celebrities handle that particular situation. You had people like Ben Stiller and Rory McIlroy who are very up for talking to Martin Brundle and anyone else who puts a microphone in their face. With Megan Thee Stallion, it wasn't her fault. It was down to her security detail. And I think there need to be clearer guidelines to given out to the celebrities who attend a Formula One Grand Prix, that if you are sent onto the grid walk, if you're allowed that privilege to go onto the grid before the start of the race, you should expect to have a microphone put in your face by any number of journalists and broadcasters from across the world and be all right with it. Because if you give this negative image, you're not really putting any sort of disrepute onto Formula One. You're putting a disrepute onto yourself. I think Formula One needs to go to them and say, look, this probably will happen if you're on the grid. You need to be aware of this and you need to allow it because they're live on TV. They're doing their own job. They're trying to get some content to put out to their viewers. And, you know, we're giving you this privilege of being able to go onto the grid. So hold up your end of the bargain, basically.
Now, Downforce Radio actually had its say on the incident in an article published earlier today. We're recording this on Wednesday. Brundle tweeted, I have felt under pressure on the grid, but by people called Senna, Prost, Schumacher, Mansell, Piquet, and so on. Bodyguards visiting the grid for the first time don't bother me. Everyone's got a job to do, but they could maybe learn some manners and respect our patch. I don't think there's any reason to disagree with Brundle here. He did nothing wrong. Ultimately, the security were at fault. Megan did nothing wrong. People who are the comments of Formula One social media and different teams asking questions like, oh, who is she anyway? I've never heard of her. It doesn't matter that you've not heard of her because she, in that situation, in my personal opinion, did nothing wrong. But, Harry, as a fan of the sport, right? Just think back to when you first started watching the sport. You first started watching the broadcast, the TV, Sky Sports, Channel 4, BBC, whoever you started watching with, maybe even on the radio, for goodness sake. The amount of people who still listen to Formula One on the radio. You looked at all of the fans having fun, all of the celebrities being interviewed. You probably thought, as did we all, I want to be where they are. I want to be giving my opinion on Formula One. I want to be talking about the sport that I love. Perhaps if Formula One wants to avoid this embarrassing incident, and let's face it, it is embarrassing because of the social media backlash, whatever you have to say about it, Formula One has taken the brunt of this, as has the security detail, obviously, but Formula One, it all comes back to them. Perhaps they should be putting more emphasis and giving more interviews to the fans and to the people who pay good money, hard-earned money, to be at that Grand Prix and show people this is what you're missing out on, because that will ultimately bring more people to races.
Very interesting point. I do think that when it comes to the fans at the races, the only thing that you do see of them is just them in the crowd celebrating, cheering on their team or their specific driver. I can't remember the last time where someone went out of their way to interview just a specific fan, unless it is a celebrity, like you said. And it is a very interesting point to bring up because, yes, there is concerns with the fans, and say if it's on live, there could be something said that might not be appropriate for the sport. But I guess the fact that if you go to a fan of any team, say Aston Martin, Ferrari, who knows, if you go to that fan and ask them about the race and how they think they're going to do, they're going to give you an honest answer. They're not going to mumble around with it like some sort of celebrities would do. They're not going to give you anything other than what they want to happen or what they think is going to happen. It's going to be pure honesty. It's going to be from the heart, and they're just there to enjoy themselves. And you can obviously mix the line between enjoyment and being there for PR reasons. And this is what I think Megan Thee Stallion has come under a lot of pressure for as well on social media, which I don't think is just at all. She's been criticised for only being there, not actually liking the sport, only being there for PR duties. That's why she had so many security guards around her. And the fact that she wasn't necessarily too intrigued in the racing at all and was more about her character. And all this rubbish I'm seeing on Twitter and Instagram and all social media platforms, in theory, when you go up to someone on the grid and ask them a question like Brundle did, you're going to expect a response, especially when you're a celebrity at that high level. When you go on that grid, the moment you step on that grid and you have some sort of fame behind you, you're a recognised person in the public, and within that country, your Formula One race is holding. You are going to expect questions, and you don't have to answer them, as you said earlier, Topher. You don't have to answer them. You're not being forced to, but it is nice to give the fans what they want and to give the fans at home an interview based off of some sort of celebrity or someone who they may watch they wouldn't have expected to be at the track. Going back towards the fans, it's a bit of a different opinion. When you go to a celebrity who might not have watched Formula One for a long time or being at their first race, they're going to give a different answer, a more dulled down version than what a hardcore fan of the sport would. So I do believe, Will, that on that act, if they do get someone from the stands who they know would be trusted, who they know would give an honest answer, maybe fans for lower downsides or teams that we wouldn't necessarily see be supported, like, say, an AlphaTauri or a Haas, especially the American Grand Prix. Get fans of those to come on, because we don't necessarily see much about those teams anymore just because they're lower down the grid. Obviously, they're going to focus on the title fight, but that's not to say that these other teams are completely irrelevant within the sport, and fans of those teams might not necessarily get the voice that they are deserved within the sport. And the whole media getting caught up in celebrity talk and celebrity drama is definitely a negative weight within our sport, unfortunately. However, are things going to change? Probably not. There's going to be celebrities on the grid. There always will be, and it will be a welcome thing. It's just how it's dealt with and how, I guess, the interviewer as such deals with it themselves. As Topher mentioned, Brundle dealt with it absolutely superbly. And in the end, he didn't get any backlash from it at all. And just like expected, Brundle didn't get anything. And Alex Brundle, in fact, his son, was laughing at Brundle during the interview. So it comes down to, I guess, whether the fans want to be interviewed, which I'm sure they would. They'd love to be on television, whether it's Sky Sports or an American broadcast or whatever. But I do think it's a very interesting idea and one that should potentially be implemented within the future, with, of course, the caution of the fact that they can't just go up to random fans and ask them.
And obviously, like you've said, we are all promoting celebrities to come back to Formula One. We want to see these high-profile people loving our sport. We want to see everyone love our sport. Like the fact that we saw Shaquille O'Neal, let's face it, a massive saloon car, bringing on this trophy, which I believe he probably could have used as a drinking glass, and hand it on the podium. Now, just the message I think all of us want to deliver to the AlphaTauri team. I know Alex Johnston, our junior Formula editor, has been. I think he tweeted about it. We want to see an image of Yuki Tsunoda and Shaquille O'Neal standing next to each other, just purely because even Jenson Button and Motorsport, they've been posting this photoshopped image of the drivers looking so small on the podium and Shaquille O'Neal just regular sized. Topher, I think, is that something that we at Downforce Radio advocate for?
It completely depends on your attitude of the fun that's being had. I mean, it's all in good fun at the end of the day, and it's with the greatest respect to Yuki Tsunoda. We all know, like, just how fantastic, not just a driver, but how fantastic a person he is as well. He does get a bit sweary on the radio, but he's got a good heart. He's a good guy, and we all have a lot of respect for him. And the good thing about Formula One these days is the efforts that the social media teams put in. And if AlphaTauri can do something that involves both Shaquille O'Neal and Yuki Tsunoda, it's not really taking the Michael out of anyone or anything. It's just a good bit of light-hearted fun. And I'm trying to remember what the stats are here. I think Shaquille O'Neal is 7'1", I think, if I remember correctly, and Yuki Tsunoda, if I remember correctly, I think is 5'2". So there's almost a difference of 2 full feet between them. Can you imagine the photo shoot between those two, should they be able to put something together like that? And I imagine that Shaquille O'Neal would be up for that. He is a fun-loving guy. He's always up for a bit of a laugh. And Yuki Tsunoda, I think I'd probably say the same about him.
Certainly. Now, after the celebrity talk, we can get back to what we all want to hear about, and that is ultimately Formula One. Harry, the biggest talking point of the weekend certainly was Max Verstappen. We went into COTA expecting Mercedes, and I can say this myself, I expected Mercedes to have this race on lockdown. I expected them to come here, possibly even take back the championship lead, but instead, although Mercedes dominated FP1, I believe they topped the session by 9/10 in comparison to Verstappen. Perez took FP2 and FP3 before Verstappen ultimately would qualify on pole and then go on to win the race. Were you surprised to see Red Bull's pace, or do you think this is just like circuits such as Paul Ricard, where we were expecting the Silver Arrows to come out on top, and Red Bull just has the advantage?
Yeah, I think that when coming into the race, especially at a track which Mercedes have dominated since 2013, you would expect Lewis Hamilton in a title fight to come back out on top. And the Red Bull's pace over the last couple of races hasn't necessarily been as strong as we've seen earlier on in the season. So going based off of that logic, I would agree with you, Will, and say that Mercedes were probably the strong favourites going into it, especially after that FP1 session. We thought this is going to be a whitewash. Hamilton's going to take this by 20 seconds at least. When in reality, Verstappen on that qualifying day was 2 tenths quicker than Perez and Hamilton. And after that first Friday practice session, it looked like Red Bull turned something on with the engine, I guess, because Christian Horner said after that first practice that the main reason they were losing so much time was because of the straights and because of the engine. And whether Red Bull decided, right, after FP2, we're going to get into the long runs, now we're going to get into qualifying pace, this is going to be a lot more of a tricky test, I guess, to what they were used to. So when it came to the news that Valtteri Bottas was taking an engine penalty again, I think that gave Red Bull spirit. They knew that Perez had the pace throughout the whole of the practice session 2 and 3, and the fact that Verstappen, we know he's in a title fight, we know how quick he is. It was going to be a 2v1 on the day. and that gave Red Bull the upper hand going into qualifying, going into the race. And even when Hamilton took the lead from the start, which he did brilliantly, you still felt that when Verstappen was sticking within that 1 second gap behind him, you still felt that Red Bull might have had the edge. The Mercedes during the race didn't look as stable as the Red Bull, especially in qualifying as well. They didn't have the traction off the corners that the Red Bull had. And going down to sort of a power track and the power elements of the Mercedes, you would have expected that the Mercedes would have ran away with it and the Red Bull wouldn't have coped within that 1 second pace. But the strategy in the end, I believe, probably won Red Bull the race. They got quite lucky with the laps that they took, actually, because they could have gone a couple laps later. It was all sort of rolling the dice, Red Bull, but they managed to just come out on top. Mercedes, obviously, they predicted the strategy. They told Lewis to go +6 or +8 laps. I can't remember which one it was of the actual plan that was made for the pit stop in the first place. So in terms of, I think, pace overall, Red Bull seems to have improved since the last couple of weeks, and going down to Mexico, it will certainly be interesting considering the past 4 years it's been 2 Mercedes, 2 Red Bull wins. So it will certainly be a track which is favoured for the Red Bull team, with Perez having strong home form there, and Verstappen, of course, in the championship fight, 12 points ahead now. You would expect Red Bull to put on a massive show and a massive fight to Mercedes, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as dominant as a lot of people are predicting, actually. They think that Red Bull are going to run away with it. I think Mercedes, they still have the power. They still have Bottas. Hopefully he doesn't get another engine penalty, and hopefully he can fight and it'll be a four-way battle for the lead, which we haven't seen in F1 for a long time. We haven't seen pretty much for the whole of the season. So the pace-wise this weekend was interesting, and it was good to see Red Bull get that win, because you thought if Hamilton was to get the win and Verstappen second, this title would have closed up a lot and it would have given Mercedes the momentum going into the next race. Certainly would have been more interesting in the closer tie, I guess, towards Verstappen and Hamilton. But now Verstappen has that 12-point gap. It's given Red Bull promise. It's given them hope for the last 5 races. And I think that at this moment, you have to say that despite being behind in the constructors, which they did gain a healthy amount on as well during the US Grand Prix, Red Bull are favourites to win this Drivers' Championship. With Verstappen and these tracks, of course, there are unknowns in Jeddah and, of course, in Qatar now. They are unknown for the Formula One cars. So going down to it, who knows what's going to happen there? Brazil and Mexico, you think maybe would favour the Red Bull, and Abu Dhabi, maybe the Mercedes. So it's really hard to call going down to it at the end. But I think the pace that Red Bull and Verstappen showed, despite being on older tyres, gives Red Bull massive promise and massive hope for the rest of the season.
And Topher, Harry just talked about the pace right at the end of the stint. But ultimately, it wasn't just their pace, but the strategy that they deployed in terms of the grand scheme of things. My question to you, and I'll give you my opinion on the subject after, is do you think Red Bull knew that Hamilton would get the jump on them? Because the strategy just looked so planned out. Surely it could not have just been a spur-of-the-moment thing.
There's so many different permutations that can go into a Grand Prix, and those permutations are constantly being looked at on the pit wall, not just by Red Bull, but by all of the teams on the grid. They're constantly looking what's going to happen in this race. Is there any way we can make the jump on our rival in front of us? And I fully imagine that Red Bull probably did look at the data and think, maybe we should just try something a little bit different here. And we all know that Red Bull strategically are an incredible force within Formula One. They can just make these strategies work almost out of nowhere on occasions. And I think at the end of the day, it wasn't just down to the Red Bull strategy coming from the pit wall. It was also down to the pure pace of their drivers, Max and Sergio. And Max, for me, I think that was a drive that could potentially win him this year's championship. I think Harry mentioned it earlier. We all expected this circuit of COTA to be a Mercedes circuit. We all thought that they were going to walk away with it. Red Bull might get a podium at the end of it, but for me personally, I was thinking just how good Lewis Hamilton is around the circuits of the Americas. He's won here multiple times. He's won championships here. And I thought it was going to be an easy victory for Lewis. But yeah, Red Bull, they deployed an amazing strategy to overhaul the Mercedes threat. Verstappen went and got the job done in the race. And that is a 6-point advantage that he took away from there that could end up being the difference between himself and Lewis come the end of the season. And one thing I think the Red Bull can look forward to, the next two tracks that we have on the calendar, being Mexico and Brazil, they're Red Bull tracks.
Exactly. Brazil and Mexico both historically favouring the Red Bulls, and the RB16B is just looking that good in terms of the downforce there, Topher.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's also a couple of tracks that are going to fill both Max and Sergio with a lot of confidence, because they both know that the Red Bulls run very well around those two circuits. Verstappen, I think, has taken victory at both of those circuits before. Sergio Perez, it will be his home Grand Prix in Mexico City. So, of course, he's going to be fired up for it. So I think that the victory that Max took at COTA was a very important one, because it can now set them up for potentially two more victories in a row. And I would absolutely love to see Sergio Perez take victory at his home Grand Prix. I mean, we all know what the atmosphere is like within the Foro del Sol in Mexico City. How incredible is that atmosphere going to be? I mean, we mentioned the American atmosphere at the Circuit of the Americas. That's going to be 10 times more than that should Sergio Perez win the race at Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. I think that at the end of the day, it might well come down to team orders. Perez isn't really in a fight for this championship anymore. It is between Max and Lewis. So I imagine that if Red Bull can end up getting the advantage over Mercedes at the next event, Sergio will yield to Max to help him get the championship. But, that atmosphere. If Perez gets on the podium, I think it's going to be an absolutely amazing event. And Red Bull, I think, are looking at a very good run to both titles now.
Harry, we've discussed Red Bull, and now we can take a look at their competition here. Lewis Hamilton came into the weekend as the favourite. We've just mentioned we expected Mercedes to be on top, and ultimately fell short. Do you think it was his strategy, or do you think the car just wasn't fast enough?
Well, last time out, Mercedes got criticised for their strategy, especially at the end when Hamilton had to pit. But at this circuit, I don't believe that necessarily the loss was all down to strategy. I think Red Bull were the ones who took the risk with the undercut, obviously being behind. I don't know whether they expected Mercedes to pit the lap after and for him to go for a push lap on his out lap, but Mercedes went longer, and that is, yes, it is a risk. But when you look at the tyre degradation and the fact that all drivers pretty much on the grid were complaining about how much of a tyre race it's going to be and how much of a race of attrition this track was going to be, especially with the bumps in them and the fact that a certain driver didn't have a drink the whole time as well. If you look at that and you think that Mercedes didn't necessarily take the biggest risk with their strategy, yes, they took somewhat of a risk with going longer, but confirmed to Red Bull made these tyres last a lot longer than Mercedes, and they made sure that they had the pace. They obviously must have told Verstappen the target lap times you need to keep the tyres well and to keep ahead of Hamilton towards the end of the race. And when Hamilton was closing, it looked like we're going to have an absolutely barnstorming last couple of laps. Over the team radio, I believe Lewis was told the last 3 laps are going to be critical, and that's when the overtaking was going to start. But going into those last 3 laps, Lewis just didn't have the momentum. He looked like he was stuck behind. We know how difficult the Mercedes is finding going through the traffic, as we saw with Valtteri Bottas many times this season, and of course at COTA as well. But I don't think necessarily the Mercedes had the pace that everyone was expecting. And strategy-wise, I don't think they could have done too much more. I think that if they were going to go for gun with Red Bull, if Verstappen would have got out ahead after that undercut of Hamilton, which was pretty much likely based on the pace that Verstappen was showing Hamilton on the old tyres, then I think the Red Bull might have just cruised away. The Red Bull looked like it had the pace the entire time, and I thought that Perez at the start of the race, when he wasn't completely drowned by sweat and the fatigue in that car, he was sticking with them. He was within the 3-second sort of gap between Lewis and Max. That gap started to drift as you could tell fatigue was setting in. But I think that overall, Mercedes just lacked the traction. They lacked the pace. Their car didn't look as stable as first thought within the first practice session. It looked like Red Bull had a massive advantage at a track that was a massive disadvantage going into. So that's going to give Red Bull an insane amount of confidence. And you think to Mercedes, with 2 unknown tracks coming up, 2 Red Bull tracks and maybe 1 Mercedes track, which we saw Red Bull win at last time we were there, it's not going to fill them with much confidence considering they're 12 points down in the championship. Yes, they've still got constructors well on the way at the moment, but with Perez's performance and with a home Grand Prix, as Topher said, with the fans behind him, for the first time Perez being in a race-winning car, let alone a championship-winning car as well, it's going to give Red Bull the momentum and the confidence they're going to need to strike on with the Drivers' Championship, and probably the Constructors is going to close up within the next few races as well, if Bottas doesn't get, well, a reliable ICE at the moment, but if Bottas doesn't find the form that Perez is finding and doesn't go blow for blow with him, that's another thing that we need to look at as well, because Mercedes are looking a little bit lackluster at the moment compared to the Red Bulls. And it's certainly going to be an interesting finale.
Now, you talked there about Valtteri Bottas's ICE. Mercedes certainly struggling in terms of their reliability. Topher, how likely is it that Lewis Hamilton is going to have to take another penalty this season?
I mean, it's a definite maybe. I think a lot of teams are very wary about this, given the fact that they only have 3 engine units that they're allowed to use across the course of the season. And I think it is inevitable that it is going to happen to most of, if not all of the drivers across the grid. So if it does end up happening to Lewis, I think they'll just have to take in their strides. I think it is fairly inevitable that it could well happen. If it does happen, they just have to make the most with what they've got. There have been some instances in the past where a team has deliberately taken an engine change basically for tactical reasons, as in they think that there might be a particular circuit that they could get a bit more benefit out of it, or at least lessen the blow of it. Looking at the circuits that we have across the course of the rest of the season, I'm not really sure if there are any of the remaining 5 circuits which are obvious to take a tactical engine change for that reason. So, yeah, I think they'll probably just have to take it as it comes. Whether it will happen or not, I can't say for absolute definite. But just given the very nature of the cars and how much stress they put through the engines, I think I'd probably put my money on Lewis Hamilton taking a grid drop at some point in the remaining 5 races. I don't know for certain, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did happen.
Moving away from the top 10, or the top 8, sorry, it was another fantastic, and there's no other way of saying this, fantastic fight between McLaren Mercedes and Scuderia Ferrari. Harry, this championship fight between the two of them for third in the title. I remember at the season, Mattia Binotto came out and said that Ferrari's minimum target was third in the championship, and ultimately everyone sort of looked at Ferrari's pace last year and thought, is that really plausible? And now they are just 3.5 points behind the team which last year took third with so much promise. And we expected this year them just to go for third again, in all honesty. I was expecting them to have it quite easy, but Ferrari really have delivered a good challenge here.
Yeah, they certainly have. And let's not forget, at Ferrari's backyard, McLaren took a 1-2. So adding those points into consideration that Ferrari lost on that day, they've created a massive gap. Well, they've closed a massive gap to McLaren. And I guess that's what happens when you've got 2 reliable drivers within the car. Obviously, last year, Sebastian struggled massively with the car. And I don't think you could say that Charles had a very easy time with it either, to be honest. But when you have consistency within your teammates, that's what wins you titles and constructor titles. Obviously, they're not fighting for the title, but for P3, that's a lot of money compared to finishing in P4 in the constructors. And this fight between Ferrari and McLaren is going to go down to the wire. We saw there was some argy-bargy on track. There was collisions between Ricciardo and Sainz. Obviously, nothing was coming through because it looked like a bit of a racing incident, to be honest. But you look at the 2 drivers for Ferrari, Sainz and Leclerc. Sainz has really showed up this season. We've seen him go blow for blow with Lando Norris, and now we're seeing it with Charles Leclerc, who in my eyes, if he gets a good car, is a potential world champion. So what's to say that Carlos isn't? Because Carlos still is only young. He's not an older driver. He seems to have been in the sport for years and years now, but he's still not exactly a very old driver. And to have that alongside a young and hungry Charles Leclerc is only good news for Ferrari. It's not good news for their drivers' academy, but it is good news for the Scarlet Reds. And McLaren, you look at Daniel Ricciardo's form of recent, since Belgium, he's been outscoring Norris by a significant amount. Yes, we know that Norris has had some issues along the way, but you can't fault how Ricciardo's turned his form at the start of the season. And I guess before the summer break, he was getting massive criticism, and I am one of those. I have to hold my hands up. But the way in which Ricciardo has bounced back, it looks like he's got to grips with his McLaren more, whether it's a setup change, maybe he's making it more to his liking with that car. Who knows? But it seems Ricciardo has found the rhythm, he's found the mojo in that McLaren, and it's something that is welcome to see by anyone who watches Formula One, because we know how lovable Daniel Ricciardo is as a character, and to see him performing in a McLaren and a McLaren versus Ferrari battle for P3 in the constructors, two heavyweights of Formula One battling out week after week, is something of a spectacle that we need to keep our eyes on. And obviously there's the whole Carlos Sainz doesn't get enough airtime compared to any other driver, really. But I think that now it comes down to it, he has to get the airtime. Him and Charles Leclerc having this consistent battle between him and McLaren is something that I don't think we've seen for a while for a P3 constructors fight. And to see how Charles Leclerc is not necessarily beating Carlos Sainz within every weekend. There's not necessarily a week where we look at it and we see Charles Leclerc 6-7 tenths faster than his teammate. It's very rare that we see that with Carlos, and see Carlos has moved teams to a Ferrari that looked lackluster. There was struggles going into the season with obviously last year's car. To see that he is on par with Charles Leclerc during his first year is insane to see for the Spaniard, and I think that he's a criminally underrated driver. And going to McLaren land and Norris, we know how good of a driver he is, the youngster, and he's got form. Daniel Ricciardo's got a race win under his belt this year. I don't really know how to call it. We know Ferrari like the street circuits a bit more. McLaren have that engine power, but it's just too tough to call. You would think Mexico maybe would have suited the McLaren a bit more than the Ferrari, but Ferrari have these engine upgrades that just seem to keep rolling out every week somehow. I don't know how they keep doing it, but it appears that Ferrari are closing the gap, and I would not be surprised to see Ferrari, who were expected to finish about 5th or 6th, probably in the constructors on average by predictions earlier on in the season. I have them probably favourites to finish 3rd.
I'd just like to interject quickly here regarding the fight between Ferrari and McLaren. I just want to give a shout out right here to the TV production crew who put together the broadcasts for the world feed for the Grand Prix. And reason being is that on the first couple of laps, we had this amazing battle going on between all 4 of the Ferrari and the McLaren drivers, even going 3 wide down the back straight, heading down towards what is quite a tight left-hander. And then we're having the battle to see who gets there first. And quite a lot of the time, at the start of a Grand Prix, the TV cameras will usually focus on those who are fighting at the front. Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, whoever. But this time, they actually stuck with the midfield battles, and we were treated to this absolute spectacle that had me on the edge of my seat, watching these cars go 3 wide down the straight, coming up on 200 miles an hour. And I'd just like to say, full props and full respect to the TV production crew for actually sticking with that battle and giving us something exciting to watch.
And Topher, just to follow up on that point there, Harry just talked about who he believes will finish 3rd in the championship. Just give me your thoughts on who will.
Can I pass this one? I really don't know. It's such a titanic battle that we have going on between those two. I think if you're going to go on current form, then I'd probably have to say McLaren. They're bouncing back from a 3rd place finish last season, and they've got a really strong run of form going at the moment, which they've carried through into 2021. We've had Ricciardo winning a race. We've had Lando on the podium multiple times and very nearly winning in Sochi as well. But having said that, Ferrari have just been so consistent, and that is that's what's keeping them in this battle with McLaren for 3rd place in the championship. And Leclerc, he's been on the podium only once this season, 2nd place at Silverstone. Carlos Sainz, he's been on the podium 3 times, 2nd at Monaco, 3rd at Budapest, and 3rd at Sochi. It's those consistent results, especially from Carlos, is what's keeping Ferrari in this fight with McLaren. and there's only 3.5 points between them with 5 races left to go in 2021. Yeah, again, I think I'd like to pass your question, Will, because I just honestly don't know.
Stepping away from the modern sense of Formula One, as you guys know, my favourite segment of the show, on this day we take a look at things that have happened on the day of recording in Formula One history, taking you back to 1963 this week. And funnily enough, we're talking about the Mexican Grand Prix. My question to both of you gentlemen is, what team and driver won that race?
I usually go first. I'll let Harry go first on this one.
Sorry, I've tried unmuting.
Sorry, I'm trying to Google it.
No, I honestly, 1963 is way before my time. I don't even have an answer. I won't lie.
Go on, just give it a guess.
1963. Oh. Topher, give me 3 and I'll pick one.
Give you 3. I'm trying to rack my brain remembering who was in that championship now. The thing is, I have my answer and I don't really want to give you an answer. So, yeah, you're on your own, buddy.
Ferrari.
And the driver?
Oh. Was Jim Clark Ferrari back then? I'll just go Jim Clark. He's the only one. We'll go for that. It's way before my time. I know Topher's not born in 1963, but I didn't pay too much attention to the 1963 season, to be honest. I won't lie.
Well, Topher, your answer.
Well, with regards to my answer, I can tell you actually, Harry, that Jim Clark never drove for Ferrari in Formula One.
Lovely.
Jim Clark was a champion of 1963, and it was a championship that he absolutely dominated. So I think if you're asking me a question of who won any particular race in 1963, the very safe bet, which I'm going to go for, is Jim Clark, and he was driving for Lotus that season.
He was indeed. Harry, you got the driver right, but I'm afraid Topher's topped this one once again.
Am I playing with Sebastian Vettel?
Maybe one day you might get a question about Sebastian Vettel. You never know.
Oh, please.
So if you can emulate his efforts on Grill the Grid, naming every single world champion, I'll give you the respect for that.
Yeah, good luck with that.
One person who wasn't able to name every champion, I think he stopped at 2018 when he guessed Nico Rosberg. Yuki Tsunoda, Harry. We spoke about him earlier in a more lighter sense, but I think right now only can give him a round of applause for his performance in Austin. He's had a difficult season, but in Texas, he really did bring home some good points for AlphaTauri, and when Pierre Gasly retired from the race, it was some well-needed points.
Yeah, it's been an interesting weekend for the AlphaTauri garage as a whole. Of course, Gasly struggling within the race and at the start of the race with issues, but Tsunoda, he slowly got away with his job, I think, and I think probably P9 was the best that he could have done this weekend, and it was a solid drive from the Japanese, who obviously we know it's been broadcasted that he's now sort of being coached almost by Alex Albon, obviously a former Red Bull, former AlphaTauri or former Toro Rosso driver, so it does seem to have had an improvement. I do believe that if you would have thought Vettel might have started higher up, or if Gasly stayed in the race, one of the Alpines would have caught up, that he might not have scored points, but you make your own luck within Formula One. He managed to qualify well, and I think the AlphaTauris pretty much extracted their pace from qualifying. I don't think they could have matched the speed of the Ferraris, or certainly not the McLarens this weekend, unfortunately. So I think obviously taking up the top 4 spots of Mercedes and Red Bull, usually you would have expected Ferrari and McLaren take up the next sort of 4 as well. So that leaves just the 2 spaces at the end of the points. And I think that Tsunoda probably extracted the maximum amount of points that he could have done for AlphaTauri this weekend. I think it was sort of a calmer drive. We didn't really see too much of Tsunoda on the screens, but you've got to give credit. Of course, he's got the seat for next year. And the main focus of him probably for next year will be improving his sort of style towards the AlphaTauri in Formula One as a whole. I think he went into it a little bit gung-ho, to be honest. Starting off, of course, we saw the pre-season testing when he was topping timesheets at some points, he looked like one to watch, but slowly dissipated throughout the season. Now he's sort of starting to find a little bit of form again. I don't think there's any doubt in Tsunoda's ability. I think that he's certainly a driver who belongs in Formula One at this moment, and I do believe he deserves his seat. And after this weekend, I don't think he could have done too much more, to be honest. His pace was quite good. I believe that if there was a couple laps more, maybe Vettel would have caught, and if Alonso stayed in the race, he probably would have caught, but that's if buts and maybes. And Tsunoda did his best, and he got probably the best result that he could have done for AlphaTauri this weekend. And on to Mexico. It will be harder, of course, with the other drivers within the mix again, but certainly I think Tsunoda maximised his potential out of the AlphaTauri this weekend, and I think as a general sort of rule of thumb, he can hold his head high.
Topher, in comparison to Tsunoda there, one fight which definitely was not calm, Antonio Giovinazzi, Kimi Raikkonen versus Fernando Alonso. Quite the track limits debacle. Raikkonen
yes, this was an interesting one.
Well, it was. Raikkonen apparently overtaking Alonso off circuit. Alpine then coming over the radio to Michael Massey asking if it was allowed. And then Michael Massey replied no. So Alpine just responded, okay, so it's only allowed if you're Raikkonen then. Alonso then overtook Giovinazzi off track. Giovinazzi then overtook Alonso off track. And ultimately the Spaniard was the one who came out on top and retired from the race. It was entertaining. It certainly was, but a bit odd at the same time.
It was definitely entertaining, and the introduction of having the team radio to Michael Massey, I think, has been absolutely brilliant for the entire spectacle of Formula One, as we now get to hear a bit more of the behind the scenes that goes on with the teams when we have an incident happening. We had it earlier in the season with Toto Wolff as well. I think it was at Imola, if I remember correctly. But yeah, we had the incidents going on track between Alonso and Raikkonen, prompting the usual gifts of Robin Williams in Jumanji asking, what year is it? It was absolutely brilliant to watch. And we did have Alonso and Raikkonen going wheel to wheel, rubbing his racing sort of thing going on. We had debris coming off the cars as well. It was fantastic to watch. And inevitably, it did promote the whole question of track limits. Can you pass off track? Can you not? And I've mentioned in a previous podcast that I think that the white lines should define the racetrack wholly. We have this situation where stewards only monitor track limits at certain corners. And it could be also argued, was Raikkonen pushed off track unfairly? Was there anything more he could have done to avoid it? And so on and so on. And I do completely agree that the white lines should define the track. And if you pass off the white lines, then you should give the place back. But living it in the heat of the moment watching on TV, I was just enjoying a titanic battle between two legends of the sport. I wasn't thinking track limits. I wasn't thinking, oh, he's overtaking him off the track, he should give the position back. I was just thinking, we've got two champions of Formula One going at it wheel to wheel. This is absolutely fantastic to watch. I want to see how this pans out. Didn't really want any sort of intervention from the stewards. There's a part of me that still thinks that rubbing is racing. If there's a bit of contact, as long as it's not taking another driver out of the race completely, let them bang wheels a little bit, let them get close, let them make that daring dive bomb down into turn one, and I think it was just about borderline, but I would have said it was perfectly fine. And then we had the same battles going on later with Antonio Giovinazzi and Fernando Alonso as well. I'm going to put forward the exact same arguments. I think it was hard, but for the most part fair. And I think Alpine, they were completely within their own rights to go to Michael Massey and say, is this okay? Oh, but he did this. It can be seen by some people as a little bit, oh, he hit me sort of attitude. But like I said, rubbing is racing. I love to see these drivers getting up close and personal and having these close quarters battles with each other. Alonso, he ultimately came out on top in that battle. He prevailed through the battles with the Alfa Romeos. Let them race, I think, to sum up my points on that one.
Harry, you said earlier you wanted to talk about Sebastian Vettel and you thought you'd be better at talking about Sebastian Vettel. Now here's your chance. Sebastian Vettel went from the back of the grid to a points finish. Certainly not a bad day for the full-time world champion.
No, it wasn't a bad day, actually. I thought that looking at it in qualifying, Seb obviously had one mission and he was quite happy after beating both Alonso and Russell in qualifying too, obviously starting P18 at the time. So from that, I've noticed throughout the season that Vettel hasn't had the best of starts in the Aston Martin, so I was a little bit worried, to be honest. He did, I think, lose the position to Russell, but due to the carnage between Latifi and Stroll, the Canadians colliding in Texas. So he did gain a couple of positions, and of course the Hasses, they're just free passes, really. So other than that, the strategy that Aston Martin worked on was a brilliant one as well. They waited long for both Vettel and Stroll to make sure that they had the pace at the end of the race and the end of the second stint to get towards the likes of the Alfa Romeos and the Alfa Tauris. Of course, he got a bit of luck. I believe that he probably would have been caught by Fernando Alonso. He was on the fresh and mediums after doing, I believe, a free stop, while Vettel was on slightly fresh, but not as fresh, hard tyres. So he did get a bit of luck, but to get points from that race from P18, and Aston Martin, we know, definitely doesn't have the pace to score points from, say, P6 upwards this season, I think is a very good result. And to be honest, in the team radio afterwards, I don't think Seb was too happy with it. I think that he thought there were more points to be won today with the pace he had in the race. I know that throughout a lot of the practice sessions, he was the driver who set the most lap times. He was certainly focusing on race pace, as you would, knowing you're starting at the back of the grid throughout most of the practice sessions, if not all. I thought that he was quite calm and collected in the way that he went through things, and he was thoroughly quicker than Lance Stroll this weekend as well. Of course, some people say that's not much of an achievement, but Stroll doesn't necessarily get the credit he deserves, and I think that Seb completely dominated him this weekend. So Aston Martin to get a point from P18 is quite good. Obviously, Stroll didn't seem to have the pace after the collision with Latifi. He did try to stick with Seb in the Alfa Romeos, but he just couldn't quite. Overall, it wasn't a bad weekend for Aston Martin. They've taken the penalty that was obviously going to be necessary with Vettel. I believe that Stroll will probably need another ICE before the end of the season, as I don't believe he's taken one yet. So it will certainly be interesting to see whether these tracks, especially Jeddah, we saw how good Seb was around the streets of Monaco and Baku. So it will be interesting to see around the fastest street circuit in the world, apparently, how well the Aston Martin and Seb Vettel does. So I do believe there are many more points on the table for Aston Martin this season, but as a whole, I don't think this season has been very optimistic. Unfortunately, Vettel's done all he can. He's got the podium in Baku. Unfortunately, got robbed of the podium in Hungary. So there's been potential in races, but as a whole, I don't think Aston Martin are going to be too happy. I was quite happy. I'm pretty sure I got way too happy. I voted Seb for driver of the day around Texas, but I'm pretty sure that even though he didn't sound it, Seb will be quite happy with P18 to P10. That's practically the maximum Aston Martin could have extracted from this, a P9 and P10 from this weekend, as the others were just too quick from where they started. So as an overall consensus, Aston Martin might not have had the best seasons, but it was an okay race weekend for Seb, maybe not for Lance.
Topher, considering it was the US Grand Prix and at the circuit of the Americas, there is a place on the circuit called Haas Hill. I think the home crowd would have been expecting a better result from Haas with Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, but ultimately they don't have the pace this season, and it was never going to be a strong weekend for them.
I don't know if they would have expected a good result for Haas, but probably just merely wanted a decent result for Haas. We all know that car is really not up to scratch this season. They've hardly done anything in the way of developments over the course of the season because they're concentrating on 22. I've said before, I think that is absolutely the right thing for them to do. They're not in a position to fight for the championship this season. So why not take that gamble and focus all of your efforts onto the regulation changes and potentially get a jump on at least some of your opponents? But speaking on the United States Grand Prix in particular, we didn't really see a lot of the Haas drivers anyway. We don't really tend to see too much of them on TV anyway, except when they're spinning, crashing, or having their own battle between themselves. In this particular race, I just don't think there's anything in particular for them to write home about. We had Schumacher starting 16th and finishing 16th, and we had Nikita Mazepin starting 17th and finishing 17th. I mean, what can you say about that race for them? I think more than anything, all they can take away from the United States Grand Prix this year is just more track time and more experience for both their drivers as they both look to make themselves into better Formula One drivers.
The final point of the day, guys, just to round out the show, is obviously we've discussed it briefly, but the next race is the Mexican Grand Prix. I just want to hear from both of you what your predictions are for the weekend, who you think is going to take pole position, and who you think will take P1, P2, and P3. Topher, if we start off with you.
Well, we mentioned earlier in the podcast that historically Mexico City has been a bit more of a Red Bull track, and I don't see any reason why that should be different this time around. I would like it to be Sergio Perez who takes the win in front of his home crowd, but I think that ultimately Sergio will help play the team game, given that we're getting to the crunch points in the championship now, and Max will inevitably go on and win the race. Hamilton possibly on the podium, but I think it will probably be a Red Bull 1-2 Max ahead of a very compliant Sergio.
Harry, do you agree with Topher?
Yeah, for the most part, I do think it is Red Bull's race to lose. I think at the moment, you'd say it's probably their Drivers' Championship to lose now. So I do think Mercedes will put up a fight early on in the weekend. If Bottas doesn't have a 50th ICE put in his car, I believe that he'll be up there with Hamilton fighting for pole. I would not be surprised to see a Mercedes on pole, or certainly at least one on the front row of the grid. So I do believe Mercedes will get off to a strong start to the weekend. As per usual, Bottas will probably lead Friday practice 1, but I can't see anyone toppling Verstappen this weekend, unfortunately. I do believe that it will be a Verstappen 1, maybe a Hamilton 2, and Perez and Bottas fighting for P3.
Ultimately, I think I have to agree with both of you, to be honest, because it's certainly going to be Red Bull's race to lose in Mexico. I think they're going to have the pace of their car, same with Brazil and possibly Qatar as well. Ultimately, however, I don't think it's going to be as easy as everyone's thinking it will be. Mercedes have shown that they have regained their straight line speed advantage. They've regained that engine power, and with the suspension as well, that they've shown off in Turkey and in Texas as well. So, realistically, I think it's going to be Red Bull versus Mercedes, as it has been for the rest of the season. I think it's going to be another brilliant fight. And the final message to the viewers really is let us know what you think on our social media at Downforce Radio on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. But unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today's show. Thank you very much to Topher and Harry for joining me once again. And thank you very much to everyone at home for listening in. Remember to check out downforceradio.uk to take a look at the radio station and all the latest and greatest articles from the world of motorsport. Social media, as I mentioned, at Downforce Radio, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, we're on it. And that's the end of another fantastic episode of Maximum Downforce and another fantastic race weekend in Formula One. I hope you're having a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, wherever you're listening. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
Go, go, go! Anytime and immediately! This is amazing! The worst start for a Grand Prix